Hello there. Now, Star Trek as a franchise, as we're all fans of it, I think it's top tier. It's up there with some of the best science fiction storytelling ever created. But, and this is a sort of a weird but here, it does sometimes fall flat for its sort of sometimes lack of scope. Now that's not a fair assessment, it isn't, but it is something that I've encountered with some non-Trek fans. They think it's not grandiose. I mean, there's episodes of Star Trek about Data playing Sherlock Holmes on the holodeck, or Picard reciting Shakespeare, or, you know, Kirk knocking boots with another alien woman. As interesting as these things are, they're not world-ending planetary disasters, etc. But I think it's an unfair assessment, and one of the areas it does fall flat is in scaling. Because we all think, oh, a Star Destroyer from Star Wars is gigantic, isn't it? It's huge. It's beautiful, big, wedge-shaped cheese, sort of a vessel with lots of guns. Now, Star Trek does have that. The difference is Star Trek doesn't build its entire story on having the biggest gun. This is not a gun measuring contest as far as Trekkies are concerned. But screw it, today, gentlemen and ladies, we are slamming our guns down on the table. We're going to measure them. Now this is not exactly what I'm going to call a detailed list, but it is a fun story. It's a fun episode, I hope, for me anyway, don't know about you. But we're going to discuss exactly where Star Trek doesn't fall flat on its arse and actually has some of the biggest toys around. And there are some truly gigantic vessels in Star Trek. And we're going to start off with the eponymous Borg Cube, or Borg vessels in general in reality. Borg as a collective could be considered a single entity. They are vast, they are huge, but their ships are imposing, powerful, and beyond normal human understanding. When first encountered, a Borg Cube seemed completely alien. I mean, literally alien, obviously it is, but very alien to the crew of the Enterprise, who were already used to encountering alien ships and alien species and alien technology. But a Borg Cube, decentralized, basic geometric shapes with an uneven surface, no obvious front, back, no obvious engines, no obvious bridge, no one in charge. They are so different, but also they're huge. A Borg Cube, on average, the average Borg Cube, is a 3,000 meter across vessel by 3,000 meters the other way, and by 3,000, basically it's 3,000 meters cubed. I'm not doing that math. Basically, that's about 1.8 miles in every direction. I mean, it's a big bloody ship, and you factor in the countless miles of corridors and other areas within the ship, the interior volume of this vessel must be huge. That math I'm definitely not doing. Feel free to comment down below. The Borg Cube is huge. It is powerful and just intimidating. But in addition to that, this isn't exactly the biggest thing the Borg build. That's the biggest standard ship the Borg build. You then look at the Borg Unimatrix. The Borg Unimatrix contains hundreds of cubes. Now, the Unimatrix is not a ship, but we're not necessarily talking about the biggest ships. We think the biggest things, the biggest artificial structures, should I have said at the beginning of this episode. And the Unimatrix, as I said, it contains hundreds of Borg cubes. Thousands of interlinked modules. It is vast. It's basically, I mean, it's never actually described exactly how big it is, but you've got to imagine if every cube contained within it is 3,000, well, docked to it is 3,000 meters across, and there are hundreds of them and there's still plenty of room. It's big. It's huge. It's one of, if not the largest constructions ever encountered by the Federation. Then you've got things like the Borg Transwarp hubs, of which there are multiple scattered across the galaxy. These things are the size of a planet, if you include this sort of big energy ball they seem to be attached to. The actual structure itself is, of course, nowhere near that big, but they're still big, just not as big as the Unimatrix. There's the first one. The next massive artificial constructs encountered in the Star Trek universe would be the Dyson Sphere. Now, if you're not familiar with what a Dyson Sphere is, this is a highly theoretical artificial construct built to generate power. Basically, you would harvest huge amounts of energy from a star by building a structure around it designed to collect it, like solar panels, but lots of them, all interconnected and ultimately funneling the power back to where you want it. The Dyson Sphere encountered in Star Trek was 200 million kilometers away from the star in which it was constructed around. In terms, that's almost Earth's orbit, so this thing is almost 1 AU in radius, not diameter. This thing is literally a artificial sphere in space which is the size of Earth's orbit around the sun. Kiss my ass, Starkiller Base. Seriously, this mother effer is huge. And yeah, come on, it's gigantic. Inside it, the entire interior surface is habitable. Habitable, it's not really habitable because of all the radiation from the unfortunate containing of it. Now, this isn't a true Dyson Sphere. Freeman Dyson, actually, who the Dyson Sphere is named for, was, as I understand it, told about this thing appearing in Star Trek, and he was like, yeah, that's an interesting idea. That's not what a Dyson Sphere is. It isn't truly what a Dyson Sphere is in theoretical physics, but in the universe of Star Trek, there's a Dyson Sphere built around the sun, nearly as wide as the orbit of Earth around Sol. That's big. The next artificial construct we're going to talk about is even bigger than that, and that would be the Delphic Expanse. And hear me out, the Delphic Expanse, that's a nebula or some shit. No, it isn't. The Delphic Expanse is an artificially isolated region of space created by interphasic aliens who basically want to transform our dimension to be habitable to them. They do this by building these big spheres themselves, probably the size of a Borg vessel, on their own, hidden behind cloaking barriers. These things are designed to transform our space into a compatible dimension to these aliens. A byproduct of that was they created this isolated, sort of carved off region, 2,500 light years across, and everything in it was isolated and cut off pretty much completely from the rest of the galaxy. Not entirely. The thermobaric clouds at the edges of it that defined its perimeter, you could get through them, it was just really, really hard. Inside it there was crippling spatial anomalies and all kinds of other fun problems, but the point is, it's an artificial construct isolating everything away. Now, it's a bit of a cheat one, I know, it's not technically a structure, but it is still an artificial construct. It still wouldn't exist unless someone came and built it. So in that sense, it does exist. The next one is less of a cheat, and that is V'ger. V'ger, the ship itself, the original probe, which I, by the way, have done an episode on, of course, because Star Trek the Motion Picture is highly underrated, and V'ger is kind of cool. V'ger was originally a probe launched from Earth. It part of the Voyager series, and it basically got into deep space. Some alien race came across it and they modified it. It began to learn at an incredible rate. But unlike Skynet, it didn't think that wiping out humanity was necessary. Unlike Nomad. Pfft, screw you, Nomad. This decided to build upon itself and collect information. As it did so, the ship itself is humongous. It vastly outweighs anything that it came across. But the ship itself, again, wasn't the only extension of the probe. It also created an energy cloud around itself while it traveled through space. This cloud, again, was about 1 AU in diameter, meaning it's smaller than the Dyson Sphere technically, but it's still the same sort of distance from the sun. If this thing was to park itself in our solar system with the cloud barrier intact, it would, if it sat roughly where Venus is, one edge of the cloud would be touching the sun, the other would probably actually engulf Earth. It's not like Venus is dead center, but you get the idea. It's big. It's really big. Now, some of these, they are a little bit of a cheat. They're not exactly what they say on the tin, I know, but again, they are artificial constructs. If you want to go with pure metal, big, heavily armed, big, powerful warship, there are examples of those as well. I've obviously covered the Borg. Before we get to the final one, I got a few honourable mentions. Those would be the Yorktown Starbase, the Doomsday Machine, this weird bioship from the 23rd century, Species 10C Dyson Sphere, a slightly more realistic looking one I should point out, the Kazon or Trabe carrier vessels, the Predator class as the Federation knew it as, and the Romulan Warbird, an impressively large vessel, heavily armed and incredibly capable. Not exactly the beginning and end of all the big ships in Star Trek, but they're still big and they still got some muscle to them. The one we're going to end on is the Universe class. A Starfleet-built ship of the 26th century, this vessel had quantum slipstream and transwarp capabilities and was technically classified as a temporal battlecruiser. This thing was one of the biggest, if not the biggest ship of its era. It was the biggest, baddest monster on the block, basically. It actually had, for what reports we have, a relatively thin hull, but the hull was made of such dense materials, it was near impenetrable. The ship was so much larger than other vessels of the same namesake, because the one we see was the Enterprise J. This vessel, of course, was only glimpsed briefly from a small section of the interior of the ship and its schematics on a panel. It was over 3,200 meters in length, making it technically longer than a Borg Cube, but in terms of internal volume, nowhere near as big. But we could imagine that this thing could probably have given a Borg Cube a good beating in its time period. This was an incredibly heavily armed and powerful ship all the same. So there we have some of the biggest ships around in the Star Trek universe. Let's not say that Star Trek doesn't know how to do big, because they bloody do. Sometimes it's in the science and it's not necessarily in the spectacle, but certainly they are big. And just like other franchises we can name, sometimes like the Dyson Sphere, they do something that's a bit too ridiculous for science fact, and we do hell drop back into pure science fiction or even bordering on science fantasy in and of itself. But that is the end of this episode. If you made it all the way to the end, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below, hit the bell notification icon, because that is all helping this channel grow. And just saying, this channel finally hit over all of its thresholds, where now it's somewhat self-sustaining. It's not, but it's getting there, and I appreciate it. If you're watching this and you haven't already subscribed, which I know it depends, but generally speaking, there's something like between 40 and 60% of the people who watch these episodes are not subscribed. So if you're not, just please, it helps, subscribe, hit the bell notification icon if you really want to. And with that said, if you've enjoyed this video, thank you for watching, and bye bye. I'd just like to say a thank you to everyone for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoy making these. If you did enjoy it, please consider giving a like, share and a subscribe, and maybe checking out the other videos on the screen right now, and in the description box below there are links to my other social media accounts.